Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Contra Costa Public Safety Candidates Forum, where we will hear from candidates for County District Attorney and Sheriff. I'm Gina Chanel Wilcox. I am the publisher of Embarcadero Media's East Bay Division, which includes DanvilleSanRamon.com. My co-moderator tonight is Jeremy Walsh, the division editor. And in addition to Danville San Ramon, the forum tonight is sponsored by the San Ramon, Danville area, Brentwood, Pleasant Hill, Walnut Creek, Lafayette, and Concord Chambers of Commerce, and Diablo Valley College. So thank everybody very much. We have two candidates competing for district attorney, incumbent Diana Beckton and challenger Mary Knox, and two candidates vying for sheriff, incumbent David Livingston and challenger Benjamin Terrio. The first part of tonight's forum will be for the DA candidates. Thank you to all of the community members who sent in questions, and there were quite a few. We won't be able to monitor chat for those of you who are on the Zoom. All of tonight's questions are variations of or prompted by questions sent in. The candidates were not given the questions prior to this event. We will start with a 3-minute opening statement so the candidates can tell us about their experience, priorities, and why they're running. The same question, during the questioning period, we will ask the same question of each candidate, and they will have up to 2 minutes to answer. The candidates will have an opportunity for a 60-second rebuttal upon request, and an opportunity for the other person to rebut the rebuttal if requested, and then we move on. At the end, each candidate will have 3 minutes for closing statements. And out of respect for the candidates and others, let's all agree that for audience members will be polite and attentive and as quiet as possible. No cheering, booing, distractions, or outbursts. Can you tell we've done this a couple times? So Ms. Beckton was the winner of the coin toss earlier, and she will give her opening statement first, and then we will proceed with the questions, and we will alternate who speaks first. So are you ready, Ms. Beckton?
I am ready.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, I'm Dinah Beckton, your district attorney. 4 years ago, voters like you elected me with overwhelming support. I am proud to say that I've worked hard to support victims of crime and deliver safety, justice, and progress for the people of Contra Costa County. Few positions could prepare me to serve as your district attorney than having served as a judge for the Contra Costa Superior Court for over 22 years. I was elected presiding judge, and I presided and supervised the entire court, including judges, and a $54 million budget. This makes me uniquely suited to manage the work of the district attorney's office and its budget. As a judge, I handle complex criminal, civil, juvenile, consumer, and environmental cases. I was also elected as president of the National Association of Women Judges, the nation's leading voice for women in the judiciary. Currently, the governor has appointed me to 2 pivotal committees, the State of California Victims Compensation Board and the Judicial Selection Advisory Committee, vetting the next judges to serve Northern California. Since taking office, I got right to work, cleaning up a dysfunctional DA's office that used to make headlines for waste and fraud and abuse. I kept my promise to make real and lasting change and to transform the district attorney's office into one that works for everyone in Contra Costa County. Feeling safe in our homes and our communities is what we all deserve. I work to support victims and focus resources on violent crime while holding those who commit violent crimes accountable. Also, I understand the need to balance safety with the need to right-size the justice system. I am prioritizing safety for our communities while staying resolute in working to reduce mass incarceration's harm on Black and Brown communities and people of color, and to make sure the justice system reflects the members of its community. I charged felonies against those who were involved in organized retail theft rings. I co-lead the Safe Streets Task Force, focusing on those who are committing crimes using guns, gangs, and violence in our communities. I am combating hate crime with a special unit in our office that is comprised of attorneys with specialized experience with those cases. I established the DA office's first human trafficking unit to stop the exploitation for sex and labor and dismiss thousands of old marijuana convictions. I was awarded $1 million to establish a juvenile diversion program, and I'm making sure people with substance abuse and mental health issues can get into treatment. I can't wait to share with you the amazing work that we're doing for the people of Contra Costa County. Thank you.
Ms. Knox.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the Chambers of Commerce for this opportunity to speak with the public tonight about this critically important issue of public safety. As your DA of Contra Costa County, I will do what I have done for the past 37 years. I will prosecute those who choose to commit crimes. I will hold them accountable. I will protect the rights of crime victims, and I will act ethically and with integrity. I was born and raised in Contra Costa County in a time when during the summers, we hopped on our bikes and played in the walnut orchards and rode off to the Lollipop Palace. And our only rule was to be home by the time the streetlights came on. I was tremendously fortunate to grow up in a community that provided so many opportunities to children, as well as a healthy, happy, and safe environment to grow up in. I was in the first freshman class at Northgate High School, attending school with many of the kids that I went to kindergarten with. And I moved on to UCLA for college and then Pepperdine Law School. And I came right home, and I've been in the DA's office ever since. I've worked in every criminal division in the office. I was the homicide unit supervisor. I created the Community Violence Reduction Unit focused on gang violence, which partners with the DA FBI Safe Streets Task Force. And that allowed our office to actually have our own wire rooms to do our own gang wire investigations. And the attorneys in my unit were assigned to assist in those investigations and then also to prosecute the cases. But additionally, that unit was based on intervention, prevention, and education to reduce gang violence in our communities. And I had a DA, her sole job was to go into the middle schools and bring an anti-drug, anti-gang message to the middle schoolers who are the most receptive to that message to stop the cycle of multi-generational gang violence and drug addiction. During that time period, the shootings began on our freeways, and I was assigned the duty of getting cameras on our freeways to address the investigative challenges of those cases. But working and attempting to solve those cases, I knew there were just really additional investigative challenges. So I worked to develop a system that integrated ShotSpotter technology along with pan-tilt zoom cameras that were running 24/7 on the freeways and license plate readers. I was not able to find funding for this project in Contra Costa County, so I literally went and walked the halls in the Capitol and obtained $3.5 million in funding for this system for Contra Costa County by the then Transportation Secretary, Brian Kelly. And it's this type of innovation and this type of working smarter through technology that I will bring as your DA as we work to combat the organized retail theft that has become epidemic in Contra Costa County. And I will continue to work my very best. I've been training for 37 years for this job to restore public safety to Contra Costa County.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We now move on to the questioning period. Our first question will begin with Mary Knox. Property theft crimes are at the forefront for many residents these days. Smash and grab incidents, ransacking and raiding of businesses, and catalytic converter thefts in particular seem to be more and more prevalent and a true disruption to quality of life. How will you choose to prosecute, how will you choose to prosecute those and other property thefts over the next 4 years? Take us into your decision-making mindset at the local level and any efforts you might consider to advocate changes to state law in this area.
In 2018, when I returned to doing property crimes and the felony filing for the central and eastern part of our county, I was shocked to see how the organized retail theft was spinning out of control in our county and with no accountability for the criminals. So I began to work with other organized retail theft investigators. This has become a regional problem with thieves coming into our county and also hitting other counties. So we worked collaboratively to identify these crews and then identify the county that would be the most effective as the prosecuting agency. And we've expanded this informal group into an organized retail theft task force. We meet quarterly. In fact, our last meeting was so large that we had to move it from the Walnut Creek Police Department to the Lesher Center. It's a great collaborative opportunity, and I've worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring them on board to take the larger, for example, the diamond store smash and grab robbery at Sun Valley with over $100,000 in loss, to prosecute that case federally once we have the thieves identified. I will continue to work as I am right now with all other counties and investigators to actively and proactively identify and prosecute these organized retail theft crews in our county.
Thank you. And now the same question to Diana Becton.
Sure. So with the organized retail theft and the smash and grabs, we all know that Contra Costa County certainly made history in 2021 when we had 90 individuals storm into the Nordstrom simultaneously and then exiting the same way with merchandise and also harming people within the store. Immediately, I was on the phone and on the Zoom and in meetings with district attorneys up and down the state of California. We realized that those who are committing these crimes are organized and that we have to be organized as well. So up and down the state with the district attorney's office in Santa Clara, in San Joaquin, on up to Alameda and San Mateo, including going north as well, we have partnered not only with our resources, but we are partnering with law enforcement. I partner with the Attorney General's office, state officials, federal officials, and also our local resources are at play here so that we can use the best intelligence and the best resources to prosecute these crimes. Those who have been apprehended by law enforcement have been charged with serious crimes, including organized retail theft and robbery for their crimes. And they are proceeding as we speak through the justice system so that they will be held accountable. You also mentioned the catalytic converter thefts, and this has certainly been an area where we know that residents are very frustrated. And therefore, I have been working with our task force and with our investigative unit as we are exploring the resources that will be necessary to stand up a unit that will specialize solely on automobile and catalytic converter thefts, and also focus our attention on where those catalytic converters are being sold. We know that these rings are organized as well, and so we want to bring the best resources of law enforcement and prosecution to be able to combat these crimes in our community.
Thank you. Any rebuttal?
Okay, on to question 2, and we will start with Ms. Becton. The district attorney's office plays a significant role in incarceration levels on both ends, before trial and after conviction. What steps, if any, can be taken to safely reduce the rate of pretrial incarceration in Contra Costa County? And what are your views on drug diversion and other restorative justice programs?
Well, I think in our office, what I like to do is to approach this problems on both ends, because you have mentioned it on both ends as well. But let me start first with our juveniles, because I think that is one of the places where we begin the pipeline that leads our kids into the criminal justice system. So in addition to prevention and having a prosecutor who's working every day with our schools and educating our kids about various crimes, I have secured a $1 million grant so that we are working on a program called Restore. It is a restorative justice program. It is victim-centered so that victims' voices are heard. Our youth are held accountable, but they're also getting an assessment and the services that they need so that they can thrive and be productive members of our community. Also, on the adult side, I have established several diversion programs, including a drug diversion program, so we can get people into treatment and reduce our footprint there. And then we also have just launched our neighborhood restorative partnership so that a number of the low-level nonviolent offenses can be heard by people in our community. A good example of that would be, for example, if someone were to paint graffiti on the side of this building, members of this community who've been trained in restorative justice practices by our office and our educators in that area will sit in panels of 3. They will decide what would make the college whole. Of course, you'd want your building to be repainted, and also make a decision about what would hold the offender accountable. So I have centered my work on reducing our footprint in terms of bringing people into this criminal justice system. And I have diversion programs at work, not only to assist our youth and to also assist our adults so that we don't bring them into the criminal justice system, but we're also holding people accountable for their crimes.
Thank you. I believe that pretrial incarceration is appropriate, particularly with recidivist offenders. And this has been particularly important with the property crimes and the organized retail theft. While I was doing felony filing, I would have people with arrests on their rap sheets from literally 8 to 10 different counties. And this recycling, this catch and release of criminals who then just continue to commit crimes, that needs to stop. So there needs to be an intelligent assessment of people's ability to reoffend, their criminal history, and also an assessment of the numbers of cases they have pending throughout Northern California. And there needs to be intelligent pretrial incarceration, as well as accountability. And sometimes that includes jail time and prison time to make an impression on recidivist offenders. So that absolutely needs to be part of a district attorney's office responsibility to keep our public safe. With regard to diversion, diversion is actually a legal term that has a definition in the penal code. And it refers to the situation where someone is diverted after people are charged with a crime, because our legislature recognizes that there are some crimes and some addictions that 100% there has to be oversight and accountability in order to keep people, for example, in drug treatment. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of addiction to believe that a true drug addict is going to go into drug treatment and be successful. He will fail 3 or 4 or 5 different times. And so there needs to be court intervention to have effective diversion through drug treatment. Thank you.
All right, question 3, we will begin with Mary Knox. The 2 fatal shootings involving now former Sheriff's Deputy Andrew Hall in Danville have received a lot of attention, certainly in our coverage area. While we understand the second case remains under investigation, the first obviously led to criminal charges and a conviction by a jury. What has been learned from those incidents and their outcomes? Do you feel enough is being done to hold officers accountable for excessive use of force or misconduct? What, if any, changes can be made?
Thank you. I'm actually on our law enforcement fatal incident review team. So I'm on call for 2 weeks at a time, and I go out on these fatal incidents. And I do that because I think it's really essential that the public, as well as all of the involved parties, have a transparent and fair investigation of these incidents. And I was not involved in the investigation regarding the first shooting involving Officer Hall. I was not the assigned prosecutor, so it would be irresponsible of me to comment on that filing. But I do know that the extensive delay in the filing of charges prohibited the public and all the involved parties from having decisions made at a point in time that were effective, and also it denied all of these parties the opportunity to have transparency. And so if there is going to be, these investigations have to be done swiftly, and they have to be transparent, and the use of our coroner's inquest allows the public to have access to the information in a timely fashion, since those inquests are open to the public. So that's a tradition of the Contra Costa DA's office that will continue when I am the DA. But we also have to have trained attorneys and trained investigators participating in these investigations, which I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question, Diana Becton.
Sure. So We've actually done a tremendous amount of work, and I would say a 360-degree turnaround in the district attorney's office to investigate these cases. We have a protocol in Contra Costa County that all of the law enforcement agencies have signed on to, which requires the district attorney's office, when there's an officer involved shooting, especially those resulting in fatalities, to investigate those cases. We are doing a co-investigations along with the agencies, but we are coming to our own independent conclusions with respect to criminality. When I came into this work, the first thing that I did was announce a new policy that was back in 2018, that our investigations would be transparent, so that I promised to file in every single case, which was never done before, a public report so that the public can review our decision-making. Those reports, by the way, are found on our website, and they are now up to date. In addition to that, we had an old process that had been in place for over 20 years, where we really had one person who was responsible for going out, one person who was a lawyer in our office going out to lead the investigative team. I have taken the opportunity and the time to completely revamp that process. I now have a team of law enforcement officers in my office, led by a lieutenant, that is called to the scene. I have also established, as part of our new process, a team of attorneys, as you've heard mentioned, that will also be on 24 hours call, and they go out to investigate. We did hold Officer Hall accountable. The charges were filed, and when those charges were filed, a jury determined that this officer was guilty, and a judge sentenced to prison. Despite not wanting to take an opinion here, my opponent has taken a public position to say, even though this person has been convicted by a jury, that she would not have filed the charges in this case.
Any rebuttal?
Yes, thank you. I have never taken a public stance on the charging of Officer Hall. Dan Bornstein asked me throughout an endorsement interview, Ms. Becton was present on the Zoom, whether or not I could express an opinion about the filing of the charges. And I repeatedly told Mr. Bornstein that no, I could not, because I was not involved in the investigation, nor was I the prosecutor. So it would be irresponsible of me to express an opinion since I did not know all the facts. Mr. Bornstein then asked me, based on the facts that you do know, what would you have done? And I said, based on the fact that I do know that all 9 shots were fired within 2 seconds, that I question whether or not it would be even physically possible for Officer Hall to take his finger off the trigger. And so based on those facts that I did know, the filing did not seem appropriate, but I have never taken a stance that I did not concur with the filing.
Thank you. Any response?
I think that's directly contradicted by the newspaper article endorsing me as the candidate for reform. Mr. Bornstein, it tells it in the article that he explicitly asked that question: would you have charged Officer Hall? And Ms. Knox explicitly answered, no, I would not have. I would not have filed the charges based on this idea that he fired and could not pull his finger off the trigger, and also went on to state that there was a single shot, the first one, that killed him. She gave very detailed reasons why she would not. Then she was asked whether did she watch the video, and she admitted that she had not. And when pressed, then she said, well, I don't know anything about the case. But the fact of the matter is that she did explicitly tell Mr. Bornstein that she would not have filed the charges.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, then we move on, but you'll have 3 minutes for closing statements. Okay, this question 4 is, we're going to start with Ms. Becton. We've had a number of questions from residents asking about specific decisions by the DA's office in the last 4 years, whether it's a case with a controversial plea bargain or a choice not to pursue criminal charges. Rather than cherry pick a specific case, although you are certainly welcome to highlight an example, can you walk us through your mindset when you make those often difficult decisions, either in the past or going forward? what key factors are at play when contemplating a plea deal or charging decision in a high-profile case? And how involved is the district attorney in that process?
Wow. Well, this is an interesting question because I think, first of all, every case is different. And we have several different units within the district attorney's office that are headed up by capable supervisors. Just to give you an example of that, for example, where you might hear some of our most controversial cases might be our homicide unit or even our sexual assault unit. So each of those units will have a prosecutor who has years of experience within the office who is supervising that particular unit. That supervisor also has another layer of supervisors as well, so that in addition to supervising their team, they are making the filing decisions about that case, and they also have the autonomy to be able to take into account all of the facts, the harm to the victim. They will have the opportunity to take into account the seriousness of the crime. There are several factors in our penal code that would also be taken into account, whether they have a criminal history, whether this was a scheme or any other type of organized event. So many factors that could go into play. But the supervisors of those units really have the autonomy not only to file their cases, but also to enter into the plea bargaining process. So it's very seldom that the district attorney is actually involved in those decisions. There are certain very high level cases where we might take a roundtable with the entire management team to be able to come to a conclusion and a decision as to whether or not a case should be filed and also whether or not a case should be plea bargained. But for the most part, those units are supervised and staffed by experienced attorneys who are able to make those decisions.
Ms. Knox?
Thank you. For example, when I was supervising the homicide unit, I routinely was making decisions on homicides that were filed throughout the county in addition to gang homicides. But I routinely spoke with the then DA, Mark Peterson, and with prior DAs about high profile cases and the filing considerations, and discussed those filing considerations with the DA. Not in a hands-off approach, but the DAs that I worked under previously were very hands-on and involved in the inner workings of our office, particularly in cases that involved significant public safety or high-profile issues. For example, when frankly, the massacre in the Airbnb in Orinda in 2019 on Halloween night, where 5 people were murdered, and there was such terror in that house that people were literally jumping off second-story balconies, breaking legs on their way down. That case was brought in for filing by the sheriff's office, who assisted the Orinda Police Department in that investigation. It was all very gang involved, involving gangs from Richmond, Oakland, and San Francisco. That house was loaded full of video cameras, and so all of this was organized on social media, attracting people to that party. And that case was presented for filing by the sheriff's office, and the current DA decided not to file on the bloodiest massacre in Contra Costa's history. Rather than working with the sheriff's office and the Orinda Police Department with the tremendous resources we have in the DA's office, that case was just rejected for filing and sent a very clear message to gang members that things had essentially changed in Contra Costa County.
Well, I think it would be really good at this table if we dealt with the facts of the case. We have to really understand that when that terrible massacre happened in Orinda, the sheriff's office did bring a case into our office for prosecution. There was no individual who made a decision about that case. We had our most experienced prosecutors in the office, including a prosecutor who had prosecuted not only gang cases, but also over 25 death penalty cases in the county. I'm sorry, you were holding up the 30 seconds. This is my first answer, I think. I'm not doing the rebuttal. I was going to make sure.
This is the rebuttal.
Is this a rebuttal?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So essentially, They met all day with the team from the Sheriff's Department. The Sheriff's Department even admitted they did not have enough evidence to be able to charge those individuals with the horrendous crimes that were committed that night. It was a decision that was made not only by the most experienced prosecutors in the office, the head of the homicide unit, the head of the gang unit, and also our management team that roundtabled this case. It was not an arbitrary decision. We came to the conclusion, and even the Sheriff's Department had to conclude, that we had insufficient evidence to bring charges and to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Thank you. A rebuttal of the rebuttal?
No, thank you.
Great, we'll move on to question number 5, and let's delve deeper into a topic that was touched on a little bit earlier, beginning with Mary Knox. What policies do you support to ensure fair and unbiased use of prosecutorial discretion in juvenile cases, not only in the areas of diversion programs and youth incarceration, but also when your office would decide whether to charge a minor in adult court?
Certainly. Juvenile court is very unique. It's very different than adult court. So the juvenile probation department has a tremendous amount of influence on the cases that, for example, cases come to juvenile probation at the very beginning of the process, and juvenile probation frequently diverts children out of the criminal justice system into social service programs, into diversion programs. And it's frankly an unusual case that a case is actually referred to the DA's office for filing charges. And once the charges are filed, then the decision to detain a minor, meaning in juvenile hall, that is made by recommendations through juvenile probation. They have psychologists and social service workers that write a detention report that makes a recommendation to the juvenile judge about whether or not a minor is detained with the criminal charges filing. The judge makes that determination, and frequently the minors are sent home with ankle monitors or with other controls over them to make sure that they have appropriate supervision while they're out of custody. Then with regard to the decision whether or not a minor for certain qualifying crimes, for example, a homicide or a rape that's committed after a minor turns 16, that is all done through what's known as a transfer hearing. And that hearing is done in front of a juvenile judge, and evidence is presented, all kinds of evidence related to the crime, related to the minor's prior history, related to any psychiatric or psychological issues. And then it's the juvenile judge who determines whether or not a minor is prosecuted in adult court. So the checks and balances are really very strongly within the juvenile court system itself and not within the DA's office. So I ran the juvenile unit for several years, and so I'm very familiar with the process and would continue to cooperate with the juvenile court.
Thank you. Diana Beck.
Sure. Will you please repeat the question?
Sure. What policies do you support to ensure fair and unbiased use of any prosecutorial discretion in juvenile cases, not only in the areas of diversion programs or youth incarceration, but also when your office decides whether to charge a minor in adult court?
Sure. So in terms of the policies that I would support, I've already mentioned that we have the opportunity to be able to consider when a minor might be appropriate for our diversion program, our restorative justice program. It is correct that for the minor low-level offenses, those are normally handled with our probation department, although we work very closely hand in hand with them on policies and programs that might be appropriate for the supervision of youth within our community without incarceration. But as to the more serious cases, those that might be eligible to be transferred to adult court, one of the things that I've done is to completely revamp that process. The decision used to be made solely within our homicide unit by the adult homicide supervisor. But now we've really revamped that, especially now that the decision as to the transfer has now returned to the court in the hands of the judge. When I served as a juvenile judge, I handled those transfer hearings many times. There are a number of factors that the court has to consider. And so now what we do is we put together a team that's actually led, instead of our adult side, we've now revamped that process to have our team led by the juvenile side of our house, so that they put together the transfer memo. We have a complete roundtable team of attorneys that will, first of all, hear all of the evidence that could be presented to the court and make an internal decision as to whether we would even make a recommendation to the court about transferring. Once we agree that this is a case where the minor probably cannot be rehabilitated within the time that we have within the juvenile system, then we put together a very thorough brief and memo for the court, considering all of the factors, documenting them so that the court can make a thorough and a reasoned decision.
You. Rebuttal?
No, thank you.
Moving on. Ms. Beckton will go first. An increasing scourge in all of our communities is illicit fentanyl on our streets, and the resulting impacts such as overdose deaths and exacerbating addiction problems. What role can the DA's office play in combating this issue? How can you work to ensure that individuals who deal these types of illicit drugs, and more importantly, their manufacturers and suppliers, are held accountable in court for their actions, and especially with regard to overdose deaths caused by their dangerous product?
So first of all, when the question is directed to those people who are selling drugs primarily. And so that's why I want to center my answer. If people are apprehended in our county for actually being those who are responsible for selling drugs, and especially these serious kinds of drugs like fentanyl that can so easily take the life of another person, those cases are going to be taken very seriously. That would be a felony charge, and they will be charged appropriately and proceed through our court system. So that is on one hand, but there also has to be, so for example, you mentioned what would we do, how would we charge a case? If we find that there is clearly a connection between the sale of drugs and a person, and then if that sale of drugs results in an overdose and a death, then we certainly have the capability and we would pursue murder charges against that person who sold drugs to the person who then overdosed, assuming that we could make that logical connection. Thank you.
Ms. Knox?
Thank you. The dismantling of drug enforcement teams over the past about 6 years have resulted in this huge increase in drugs moving across our border with the cartels. And the fentanyl is now coming into the state of California from Mexico. And not only is the fentanyl being sold as pills, it's also being used to lace other drugs such as cocaine and methamphetamine, so that very unsuspecting drug users are actually ingesting fentanyl in amounts that they can't even control. So there has to be a refocus on the cartel and the organized crime drug activity in the state, and begin to address this massive volume of drugs coming into California from Mexico. I was in our drug enforcement unit for approximately 10 years, and I'm familiar with all of the drug trafficking organizations and the effects. Actually, Contra Costa County is right in the pipeline of cartel drug activity. So we need to refocus on that. And then also the fentanyl related deaths, as well as other drug related deaths, such as heroin overdoses, certainly should be referred to federal agencies who actually can do that type of homicide charging and investigation. But I went through DEA's school actually for charging these drug-related deaths. And so I'm very familiar with the investigation that has to happen before we can charge them. And so all of our local drug enforcement teams, as well as street patrol officers, need to be trained for the signs to look for. So we begin those investigations right when the fatality is first discovered.
Thank you.
All right, next question, we will begin with Mary Knox. Where we are aware in many fields, public and private, there are issues with employee retention and recruitment really coming to the forefront since the onset of the pandemic. How would you describe employee morale and staffing levels within the DA's office today? And how, positively or negatively, does that affect the department's ability to do its duty?
In the past 4 years, the DA's office has lost 57 attorneys. And to put that into perspective, we're staffed for 104 attorneys. And not only are these more junior attorneys leaving, these are attorneys leaving with 27 years of experience, for example. We've literally lost hundreds of years of experience. They've walked right out the door. And why it's so crucial for our DA's office, we can't hire laterals. So when we lose someone with 27 years of experience, they're replaced by an attorney who's fresh out of law school. We're having difficulty staffing our homicide unit, our gang units, our sexual assault units, because we don't have the attorneys with the experience necessary to either run those units or prosecute the cases. The morale in our office is at an all-time low. And that all needs to turn around. We need to have people actually training and mentoring our new attorneys so that they are equipped to go to court and prosecute cases. We need to return to the training that we used to do when I was in charge of training and new prosecutor training, to allow our attorneys to start layering their experience while they're moving through units and gaining more experience. All of that is crucial to what built the Contra Costa DA's office into, quite frankly, the gold standard of prosecutors' offices in the state of California. And I intend as DA to reinstitute all of those training programs and hopefully, with the permission of the Board of Supervisors, have a one-time exemption to return our experienced DAs to the office.
Thank you, Diana Beckton.
Thank you. This is another area that we explored in depth with Dan Bornstein, and actually we've had articles written in the Chronicle as well, because it's really not accurate that we have droves of attorneys leaving the office. We have the capability for 105 attorneys in our office, and then we are at or near capacity with the number of attorneys we have. But more importantly, I actually had the data that I was able to turn over to the East Bay Times to show that the attrition in our office has not changed over the last 5, 6, 7 years. It has been the same well before I arrived, and it is about the same now. People retire. Some people get into this work and they find out it isn't the best suited job for them. And so they might move on to other positions. But the attrition rate over the years have remained exactly the same. The same number of people are retiring, the same number of people are moving on. So that part of the answer is really needs to be explored, and we have the data to prove that. In addition to that, once I came on board, I met with a number of our attorneys, and one of the things that they were concerned about was the training that they were receiving as new prosecutors in our office. That training, by the way, was the training that was previously supervised by my opponent. We revamped it with all of the suggestions from those attorneys, especially those who had recently gone through the program. So now we have a week-long training. We got what they asked for, which was more hands-on experience with using our computers and taking a live case from start to finish, knowing how to file it, practicing their opening statements and their closing statements, and going through what it takes to put a case on in the courtroom, in addition to hearing from experienced attorneys in our office to hear what their experience could bring to the table. We also have a mentorship program in Contra Costa County DA's office so that we have older attorneys who are mentoring those who are younger. Thank you.
Thank you. Any response?
Yes, thank you. Actually, the training that Ms. Beckton just referred to is the training that I put in place. It was a week-long training that literally started from the filing through the closing statements in criminal prosecution. That training was done by experienced attorneys. We have some in the audience here tonight that brought their experience, 20, 30 years of experience, to these younger attorneys to give them the skills that they needed and to start the conversation between the more experienced attorneys and the brand new to our office attorneys to begin to build those relationships. So actually, that is the program I put in place.
Thank you. Any final response?
That is correct. She did start the training, but what I'm trying to explain is that once we actually evaluated and we got feedback from the attorneys, what we found is that the training was not serving their needs. They felt that what was happening is that they were hearing a lot of war stories, if you will, from attorneys who had been there for a number of years, and they had very little practical experience that would let them hit the ground running on day one, coupled with the advice and experience from older attorneys in our office. And so that's what we have put in place now. They have the training and experience on day one to hit the ground running, and they also get mentored and the advice from senior attorneys in our office. It's a complete package.
Thank you.
Okay, that marks the end of our questioning period. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to provide closing comments, and we will start with Ms. Knox.
Thank you so much. Over the past 37 years, I've really had a unique opportunity to not only bring my own life experience to the DA's office, but to build and start layering my skills as a prosecutor. And it's with that unique experience in literally every unit in the office. I know how to use the computer system and file charges. And frankly, I just finished a homicide trial 3 weeks ago. It was the 1980 kidnapping, rape, and murder of 14-year-old Suzanne Bombardier. And it was, I'm still in the courtroom every single day, so I know exactly what the attorneys in the office are facing every single day. And I can sit with the attorneys in court and discuss their cases with them. And being a prosecutor for 37 years allows me to understand their challenges, the challenges of victims, sitting with victims in court every day and talking about the impact, such as losing your child at 14 years of age, has on an entire family's history. So I bring compassion, I bring experience, and I bring a unique skill set. In order to be a prosecutor and lead a prosecutor's office, you have to have prosecuted cases. I have done that. My opponent has never prosecuted a case. She is in a literal alliance with the DA in San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, and with George Gascon, the DA in Los Angeles. They call themselves the Prosecutors Alliance, which I think is somewhat ironic since none of the three of them have actually ever prosecuted a case. And if there are any issues about or questions about what 4 more years under Ms. Becton's administration will look like for Contra Costa County, all you have to do is look at the blight and the lawlessness in San Francisco and Los Angeles from her Prosecutors Alliance partners, her pals, and their policies to see what lies ahead for Contra Costa County. I am honored to be endorsed by every law enforcement agency in this county. They work with me. I've even worked with some of their fathers and their mothers. There are comments from law enforcement throughout this county and retired on my website under my endorsements about their experiences working with me as a prosecutor and their recommendations that I will bring the necessary change to restore public safety to Contra Costa County. And I will work tirelessly as I've done for 37 years. I've been in training for this job for 37 years. And I will work tirelessly to restore public safety to Contra Costa County and prosperity to our businesses.
When I was sworn in 4 years ago, I made a promise to do things differently. And together, we have built change that can last for Contra Costa County. We have so much more work to do. My endorsements are impressive. I have been endorsed by all of our congressmen, DeSaulnier, Swalwell, Thompson, and McNerney, our state leaders like Fiona Ma, Tony Thurmond, Betty Yee, and justice leaders. I've been endorsed by our state legislators, Rebecca Bauer-Kahan, Senator Nancy Skinner, Buffy Wicks, and Mia Bonta, our county leaders like John Joya, Federal Gulliver, and Nancy Skinner. I've also been endorsed by several mayors and council members. Educational leaders endorse me, environmental leaders endorse me, and transportation leaders endorse me. Major organizations, the Carpenters Union, AFL-CIO, labor, lift up Contra Costa, democracy for America, and I am the East Bay Times endorsed candidate for reform and for change. Today, I sit here as the first African-American woman to serve in the district attorney's office in its 167-year history, and the only African-American judge, district attorney in California. I lead a staff of 225, which includes attorneys, investigators, victim witness, and support staff. I oversee a budget of over $50 million. And by the way, I am an attorney. I had a private practice that was quite successful, and I've taken many cases to trial. Because of my training as a judge, though, I also understand the power of the office and its impact on our lives and our communities. Feeling safe, that's what we all deserve. It's what we all want. And I will continue working to support victims, focusing our resources on violent crime and holding those who commit crime accountable. At the same time, I will balance safety with the need to right-size our justice system. I will stay resolute in working to reduce mass incarceration's harm on communities of color and making sure that our system reflects the members of this community. I am running for re-election to continue the important work of keeping our communities safe and making our system fair for everyone. I'm building change that can last. I hope that I have your support. This election is not about the old failed policies of the past. And by the way, you might notice that I did not mention that I have large support from law enforcement unions. And I'm talking about the dollars, the $170,000 that they've just dumped into her campaign. That's because even though we work closely with law enforcement every day, we also have to hold them accountable. I don't take union money because when we are prosecuting law enforcement, they are also paying the defense, and I consider that a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for participating in the forum and letting people hear directly from you. We will return at 7 o'clock with the candidates for county sheriff and coroner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.